This is the Riker's beard.
Mr. Koenig, welcome.
Thank you.
How was your journey to the UK?
Oh, it was fine. It was fine. 9.5-hour flight, slept half the way, so everything is good.
So you joined the original series of Star Trek in the second series, as I understand it. And is it right that there was a bit of an outcry that there was no representation of the Russian people on the Enterprise when you had lots of other races and nationalities represented?
No.
That's not right. Is that an urban myth?
That's an NBC myth.
Ah.
They felt it would be good publicity to make it more of an international kind of event than anything else. The fact of the matter is they were looking for somebody who would appeal to the pre-adolescent girls who watch Star Trek, to build that audience base.
So you, when you first appeared, were like the Davy Jones of Star Trek, is that right?
And that was the intention. I saw the memo that Gene had written to his other producers about bringing somebody aboard who would have that appeal. That was the idea.
So can you tell us about how you were cast in the role?
Well, actually, I really, to tell the story in its fully, I have to go back a little bit. Several years before that, I was up for a guest starring role on a series about a high school teacher and his students, and it was part of a Russian. And I read, the director liked me very much. I thought it was pretty much a done deal because he was so enthusiastic. And then discovered that the script wasn't ready. So while they're waiting for it to be ready, the director decided to see more actors. He initially was just going to hire me. So he saw more actors, and he finally found somebody who was very, very different, very flamboyant, very excessive in his behavior, which was totally in opposition to the way the role was written. The role written as a very reserved, constrained, almost uptight kind of a young man who had left Russia to come to the States and was used to an education in a state-run society. So, and this guy who read was all over this place. He was up the walls and down and up the ceiling. But the director loved him and decided this is what he wanted. So they had me come back to read it that way. And I only found out that's what they wanted me to do from the casting director, who I knew. And I walked in and I read it the way I had read it initially, the way he had liked it. And he says, now do it. And he described how this other guy did it, this other young actor had done it, but without mentioning that somebody else had done it. But having known that it was another actor who had done it, I told him that I could not read it that way. If he had come up with this idea himself, the director, I would have tried it. But knowing they wanted me to echo the performance of somebody else, I found that unethical for me. It was not something that I could put my heart into. So I said no. So he said, okay, if you won't do it, goodbye. So that was the end of the story, right? That's where the story ends. Except, at the beginning of the next week, one of the leading actors on the show, Dean Jagger, became ill. So they postponed that episode. 6 weeks go by. Dean Jagger is well. The director is gone. A new director comes in. The casting director brings me back. I read one line, get the role. Okay, this Russian student, and which is the leading guest starring role. 3 years later comes Star Trek. He calls me in, and I got the part.
Excellent. Could we talk about the relationship between Chekhov and...
Well, there's not much to say.
Well, the relationship as best friends who work as a seamless unit seems to develop as the years go on. And they're always great chums at the helm console.
Most of that is inferred. Little of it is actually implied. One would assume that they'd become good friends, sitting next to each other. But there's very little dialogue between the two characters that would attest to this growing friendship. It's just two people doing their job. The whole problem for the supporting actors on Star Trek is that there was less concern about building character and relationships than there was among the top three. So it was mostly there as expositional characters, people who helped forward the story, but not really do much to reveal who they were. So that's why I say one is to infer that we became great friends. But there's very little to show, very little evidence of it in the stories themselves.
I think that's right on screen. Having read a lot of the novels, I think there's a lot where Sulu and Chekhov and Uhura are a trio who spent a lot of time together, and there's a great dynamic in the novels. I don't know how much you've ever read of any of those.
No, I haven't. I've read maybe one. So yeah, that's definitely where you got it from.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if there'd been a spin-off show with just the three of them?
Well, I guess that would have been fun. It would have been fun to feel more important to the experience. And I'm an actor. I have certainly an ego of some magnitude, and I always felt that there's more that I could do, if given the opportunity. So if we had had a series with Sulu, Uhura, and Chekhov, presumably Chekhov would have had more to do, and that would have been fun.
In the movies, of course, Chekhov does have more to do. So by the Wrath of Khan, he's the first officer, isn't he, on the Reliant? Yeah.
Well, Star Trek II was a good film. It was very solidly constructed. We had a very powerful antagonist, one to match our protagonist, which is vital to get the tension going and to keep the story moving along. So I thought Ricardo Montalban was wonderful, and I certainly enjoyed working with him. And I thought we had a very strong film with him as the bad guy.
And in The Voyage Home, of course, Chekhov has quite a lot of scenes. He gets into a bit of a pickle after he's picked up the radiation counter from it wasn't the Enterprise, it was the Ranger, wasn't it? But it was meant to be the Enterprise.
Right, very good. You know your history. Yes, in fact, I thoroughly enjoy working on Star Trek IV. That's my favorite, as a matter of fact, for obvious reasons. Chekhov had considerably more to do, was really involved in the plot, and it was just a great experience all the way around. And we told a story that was in keeping with what our best intentions were during the series. We told a story with an issue that needed to be acknowledged and dealt with that really wasn't being, and in this case it was an environmental issue.
And finally, I see on your jacket you have a Final Frontier patch. Some of my favourite Chekhov scenes are in the Final Frontier, where you're pretending to be the captain of the Enterprise to Sybok. And in particular, my favourite line of yours is where you say, "Warp speed now," and the ship warps out. How much fun was that to film?
It's amazing that you like that movie.
Oh, come on. I think it's a lovely film.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. Obviously, we wouldn't have done 6 if enough people hadn't gone to see 5. So, you're not alone. It was okay. I anticipated the situation to be far more dire than it was, with Bill directing, and I was concerned that we would have more of what we had of him as an actor when he was directing. So I was leery of what was to come. As it turned out, he was very affable, very congenial, very supportive, and so that made it pleasant enough. I only worked 10 days on the film, so I didn't have that much interaction. Didn't think it was a terribly good film. I think it suffered the same problems that Star Trek 1 did, and that is we didn't have an ending. Circumstances dictated that they had to change the ending on the set during the filming of the film. So they both were weak in that regard. But otherwise,
in relation to the motion picture, I've got your book that you wrote about the making of it here, and my favourite part of this book is where you constantly refer to Spock's look of uncontrollable euphoria. That was a wicked sense of humour.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about Leonard is his son did a documentary about him, and asked me to be involved, to be interviewed. And my comment was that I knew more about Mr. Spock than I did about Leonard, because Leonard was always Mr. Spock, off camera, in his dressing room, at lunch, he was Mr. Spock. So I didn't get to know him. I had nothing negative ever to say about him, because I knew that he was a humanitarian, that he was a good person, had a fine, strong social conscience. But we never got to be buddies, because I didn't know what to say to a Vulcan, and that's who he was.
So he never broke character?
Never broke character. That's why I've always said there are 1,000 actors in Hollywood who could play each of our roles, including Captain Kirk, including Chekhov. But there really isn't anybody who could play Spock, because he didn't play it. He was Spock. I mean, he took on that persona as his own. He embraced it thoroughly. It was, it was like a rubber suit in the water. He was never acting. He was being.
Thank you so much indeed for your time.